June 28, 1998. 19-year-old Patrece Alston, the daughter of a Broward sheriff's sergeant, climbed behind the wheel of a green Mazda. Beside her sat Lucious Boyd, a man she thought was just a neighborhood acquaintance. Hours later, Boyd came back. Patrece never did. She vanished days before her 20th birthday, and the man she was last seen with would soon be convicted of murder and suspected in as many as 10 disappearances. How does a sheriff's daughter disappear without a trace? And why do investigators believe Boyd knows exactly where her body is hidden to this day? Almost as soon as police began asking questions, Lucious Boyd changed his story. First, he claimed he'd dropped Patrece off near her grandmother's house. Then he insisted she had driven herself back, even though those witnesses later denied seeing her. He couldn't or wouldn't keep his version straight, but investigators were watching. Within months, Boyd would be arrested and convicted for the brutal rape and murder of nursing student Donia DaCosta. Years later, DNA would tie him to another victim, Eileen Trupner, a cold case solved decades too late. By the end of this video, you'll understand why detectives believe this disappearance isn't just another cold file. They believe Trece's case hides one of Boyd's darkest secrets. Before her name appeared in missing persons reports, before her face was added to cold case files, Patrece Lachelle Alston was simply Trece. She was born on June 6, 1979, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The second oldest daughter of a Broward sheriff's office sergeant, Trece grew up in a family that knew the weight of law enforcement, but also the everyday joys of South Florida life. Friends called her outgoing, independent, and sharp-witted. To her family, she was warm and affectionate, but also determined to carve her own path. At 19, Trece had dreams of moving forward in life, of one day having a career and a family of her own. She wasn't the kind of young woman who disappeared on a whim. She had roots in her community, family dinners, neighborhood friends, and a steady presence in the places she grew up. Trece lived just a short walk from the Boyd family funeral home, where she sometimes crossed paths with Lucious Boyd. Friends said the two knew each other casually, but they weren't dating. He was older, in his late 30s, and while he could seem friendly, there was something about him that unsettled people. Trece, though, didn't seem worried. She was young, trusting, and like so many teenagers at 19, she didn't imagine that someone she knew, someone from just down the street, could be dangerous. That summer of 1998, she had no way of knowing that a simple decision, getting into a car with Boyd, would mark the last time her family ever saw her alive. It was the summer of 1998 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The air was heavy with humidity, afternoons bringing sudden storms that vanished as quickly as they came. Streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of South Florida life, kids playing basketball in driveways, music drifting from car stereos, neighbors stopping to talk in the shade of palm trees. For 19-year-old Patrece, Trece, Alston, it was just another summer at home, in the neighborhood she'd always known. Her family home stood just blocks away from the Boyd funeral home, a place she often passed, and sometimes stopped in. The Boyds were known in the community, and one of them, Lucious Boyd, was a familiar face to Trece. He was older, nearly 2 decades her senior, but he had a way of being around, the kind of neighbor you couldn't avoid seeing from time to time. Friends would later insist Trece and Boyd weren't romantically involved. She had no interest in him that way. But she was friendly, polite, and maybe a little too trusting. In small communities, familiarity often dulls suspicion. On the evening of June 28, 1998, Trece climbed into a green Mazda with Lucious Boyd. He leaned back in the passenger's seat, letting her drive. The plan, at least according to him, was a road trip north, nearly 200 miles, to Winter Haven. Why she agreed is still debated to this day. Maybe it was a spontaneous trip. Maybe she thought it would be nothing more than a long drive. But what's certain is this: by the next day, June 29th, Boyd returned. Patrece didn't. To some, it might have seemed like an ordinary night. A young woman getting into a car with someone she knew. But in hindsight, that moment was the beginning of a nightmare. The green Mazda reappeared, but Trece had vanished. She was never seen again. On the morning of June 29, 1998, the green Mazda reappeared in Fort Lauderdale. Lucious Boyd was behind the wheel. He told people that he and Patrece had made it to Winter Haven, 200 miles away, but something went wrong. He said that during the night, he pulled off the road, fell asleep behind the wheel, and was woken up by a Florida state trooper tapping on his window. According to Boyd, Trece was with him, but only up until then. The story didn't sit right. When police asked him for details, his answers shifted. Sometimes he insisted Trece had made the full trip with him and came back safely. Other times he suggested she left on her own. Then came the most troubling contradiction. Boyd told detectives that witnesses had seen Trece after they returned. He even gave names. But when police tracked those witnesses down, every single one of them denied it. They hadn't seen her. They hadn't spoken to her. For investigators, that was the first crack in his story. Trece Alston was 19. She lived at home with her family. She had no history of running away. She was the daughter of a Broward Sheriff's Office sergeant. Her disappearance was immediately treated as serious, not the kind of case where police could shrug and assume she'd turn up later. The truth was inescapable. Lucious Boyd came back. Trece did not. And investigators wanted to know why. From the moment her family reported her missing, the investigation into Patrece Alston's disappearance carried a weight few cases do. She wasn't just another young woman gone without a trace. She was the daughter of a Broward Sheriff's sergeant. And that meant pressure. Pressure on the Fort Lauderdale Police Department to get answers, pressure from the public, and pressure from her grieving family. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline. The last confirmed sighting was on June 28th, when Trece climbed into that green Mazda with Lucious Boyd. From there, the trail split between what Boyd claimed and what investigators could actually prove. Boyd insisted she was alive when they returned from Winter Haven. Yet not a single witness could place her back in Fort Lauderdale. No phone calls. No bank activity. No confirmed sightings. It was as if she had vanished into thin air somewhere along Florida's highways. Detectives interviewed Boyd's girlfriend, the owner of the green Mazda. She confirmed he brought the car back on June 29th. But she also noticed something troubling. Boyd looked tired. His story about pulling off the road and falling asleep didn't add up. And Trece was gone. The more they pressed Boyd, the more contradictions piled up. Sometimes he claimed she had driven the car back herself. Other times he insisted he dropped her off at home. Each version unraveled under scrutiny. Investigators also searched the Mazda, hoping for traces of evidence. Hair, fibers, fingerprints, anything that might confirm Trece's presence after the alleged trip. But the search came up empty. There was no body, no crime scene, and no physical evidence tying Boyd to foul play. For detectives, it was like chasing smoke. That left interviews. Friends described Trece as lively, independent, but not reckless. She didn't have a history of running away. She wasn't the type to vanish without contacting her family. And most chilling of all, her health made a voluntary disappearance almost unthinkable. Trece needed medical care. She was not equipped to survive long on her own. Detectives worked around the clock. They canvassed neighborhoods, retraced Boyd's supposed route, and checked hospitals and morgues across Florida. But everywhere they turned, the result was the same: nothing. Weeks passed. Leads dried up, and with no body, the case began to stall. But investigators couldn't shake the feeling that Lucious Boyd's story hid something deeper. Because Boyd's name wasn't finished surfacing in police files. Far from it. With every interview, every follow-up, one name kept circling back to the top of the file: Lucious Boyd. Boyd wasn't a stranger to Trece. She lived near the Boyd family's funeral home. They sometimes spent time together, though friends insisted they weren't romantically involved. But what raised alarms was that Boyd was the last known person to see her alive. The contradictions in his story became impossible to ignore. First, he told detectives that he and Trece drove up to Winter Haven and returned to Fort Lauderdale together. But when pressed, his version shifted. At times, he claimed she drove herself home. At other times, he said he dropped her off. Each retelling left more questions than answers. One thing, however, never changed. Boyd always returned to the fact that he was alive, and Trece was not there to confirm or deny his account. Investigators knew he had returned the green Mazda to his girlfriend on June 29th. But Patrece was nowhere to be seen. And when detectives pressed the girlfriend, she admitted something troubling. Boyd didn't seem like a man who had just returned from a casual road trip. He was tired. His explanation, that he had pulled off the road to sleep and was awakened by a state trooper, didn't fit neatly into the timeline. Police later checked with the Florida Highway Patrol. No trooper could corroborate Boyd's story. Still, the investigation faced a brutal wall. There was no physical evidence. The green Mazda showed no signs of struggle. No blood, no hair, no fingerprints that tied Boyd conclusively to foul play. Detectives were left with suspicion, but little else. And suspicion alone wasn't enough to make an arrest. Yet behind closed doors, investigators admitted what they believed. Boyd knew what happened to Trece Alston. He knew where she was. But proving it, that was another matter. For months, Patrece Alston's disappearance weighed heavily on Fort Lauderdale investigators. They had suspicions, but no proof. And then, a break came from somewhere else. In December 1998, just 6 months after Patrece vanished, another young woman in Broward County was reported missing, Donia DaCosta, a 21-year-old nursing student. Her body was later discovered, brutally assaulted and murdered. When detectives retraced Donia's final steps, one name surfaced again: Lucious Boyd. Unlike in Patrece's case, this time the evidence told its own story. DNA linked Boyd directly to Donia's murder. Witness accounts placed him with her in the hours before she died. The forensic trail was undeniable. Boyd was arrested, tried, and convicted. He was sentenced to death. For investigators who had lived through the frustration of the Alston case, Donia's murder confirmed their worst fears. Boyd wasn't just suspicious. He was dangerous. Detectives began connecting dots. They looked at the gaps in Boyd's past, the women who had disappeared, the similarities in the cases. Soon, his name was being whispered in connection to as many as 10 unsolved disappearances across South Florida. And yet, for all the weight of suspicion, Boyd never broke. He never admitted to harming Patrece Alston. He never told police where her body might be. Each time they pressed him, he simply deflected. For Trece's family, it was agony. They believed Boyd knew the truth, but without a body, without a confession, they were left staring at an empty chair where their daughter, their sister, should have been. For the Alston family, life was split into 2 timelines: the years before June 1998, and everything after. Patrece's absence was not just a missing person report. It was an empty chair at holidays, a silence at birthdays, a space in every family photograph. Her mother described it as living with an open wound, a grief that never fully closes. And through it all, there was the same name haunting their memories: Lucious Boyd. Even after his conviction in the Donia da Costa murder, Boyd remained silent about Patrece. Investigators pressed him, hoping for a confession, even a hint. But he never admitted anything. To this day, he sits on Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution, one of the state's most infamous inmates. Meanwhile, Patrece's file remains active. Her case is listed on NamUs as number 19873, a digital reminder that, in the eyes of the state, she is still missing. Her family has not had the closure of a funeral, or even the certainty of knowing where she is. Detectives who worked the case have said they are still haunted by it. They believe Boyd knows where she is. They believe she never left that trip alive. But without evidence, all they can do is wait, for a witness, for a tip, for Boyd himself to finally speak. 25 years later, the silence remains. A young woman, a cop's daughter, gone without a trace, and a family still searching for answers that may never come. In the years since Patrece's disappearance, 3 main theories have emerged. Each tells a different story, but only one seems to fit the facts. Theory 1. The man she was last seen with, Lucious Boyd, murdered her and concealed her body. Boyd had the opportunity. He was with her in the car. He had the history. Just 6 months later, he was convicted of murdering 21-year-old Donia da Costa, abducting her, assaulting her, and leaving her body in an alley. Investigators have said the parallels are too close to ignore. But despite years of questioning, Boyd has never admitted to harming Patrece. Without a body, without physical evidence, the case remains officially unresolved. Theory 2. A random abduction. Some have suggested that Patrece may have been targeted during the long drive to Winter Haven, a young woman on the road, vulnerable to strangers. But there is no evidence of another suspect, no indication that she parted ways with Boyd. The only thing investigators know for certain is that Boyd returned alone. Theory 3. She fled voluntarily. A handful of voices have asked, could Patrece have run away? Was she trying to escape her life in Fort Lauderdale? But those who knew her say this theory collapses under the weight of her reality. She was 19, close to her family, planning her future. She had no money, no car of her own, and no history of running away. To her loved ones, the idea she simply vanished by choice feels impossible. Weighing these theories, detectives have come back time and again to the same conclusion: all roads lead back to Lucious Boyd. He was the last to see her. He gave shifting stories. And he carried the reputation of a man capable of terrible violence. The tragedy is that until evidence is found, until someone speaks, the case remains caught between suspicion and proof. And for Patrece's family, that gap is unbearable. On the night of June 28, 1998, 19-year-old Patrece Alston climbed into a green Mazda with a man she thought she knew. A man who lived just down the street. A man her family trusted enough to let into their neighborhood, their lives. Hours later, Lucious Boyd came back. Patrece did not. He has never told investigators what happened in those missing hours. He has never admitted where she went, or why she never returned. For her family, that silence has stretched across decades. Today, her NamUs file remains open, case number 19873, a digital reminder of a daughter, a sister, a 19-year-old whose life stopped on the side of a Florida road. Investigators believe she is among Boyd's victims. But without her body, the truth is still locked away. 25 years later, the question echoes louder than ever. Where is Patrece Alston? So what do you believe? Did Lucious Boyd kill Patrece Alston and take the secret of her final moments to death row? Or is there another answer investigators have overlooked for 25 years? Her family is still waiting, still hoping for closure? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to follow more cases like Patrece, consider subscribing. We revisit the mysteries that still haunt families, detectives, and entire communities. Because every missing person deserves to be remembered.